My world had always been one of silence. Not the kind that rings in your ears with a painful absence of sound, but the kind that envelopes you like a soft cashmere throw, warming and comforting. The silence of morning coffee on the porch, before the neighbors stirred and only the thrushes carried on their unhurried conversations in the crowns of the old oaks. The silence of rustling pages of a beloved novel, where words flowed into a gentle current, carrying you far from reality. The silence of the garden, where every flower, every blade of grass, seemed part of an ancient, voiceless ritual. I, Evelyn Reed, 72 years old, had always considered myself the guardian of this silence, its quiet captain. My house, an old Victorian with creaky floorboards and the ghosts of bygone years in every nook, was my anchor. Here I had lived most of my life. Here, Robert and I had raised our Nathan. Here, I mourned my husband when he quietly passed almost 10 years ago, leaving behind only the echo of his footsteps in empty rooms and the scent of his favorite pipe tobacco, which seemed to have seeped into the very walls. I had always been proud of my life, my family. Robert was a pillar of our community, a loyal husband, and a wonderful father. Nathan, our only son, had grown into a respectable man, a successful lawyer, a loving husband to Sarah, a devoted son. He called me every week, and on holidays, we always gathered together. I believed that our family, like a well-oiled machine, ran without hitches, without secrets, without strain. My life was an open book, every page written honestly and without embellishment. Or so I thought. On that morning, as the world began to crack, I sat on my porch, sipping cooling coffee and enjoying the view of my small but lovingly tended garden. The roses, it seemed, bloomed especially profusely this summer, their petals like velvet hands extended to the sun. The newspaper on my lap featured news of politics, new bills, distant tragedies. My world was cozy, predictable, and I had no idea that in a matter of moments, it would transform into a battlefield. The phone rang. I reached out to pick up the receiver and saw Nathan's name. I smiled. It was his weekly duty call, and I was already anticipating his stories about work and inquiries about my well-being. "Hello, my dear," I said into the phone. Nathan sounded a little nervous, even breathless. "Mom, hi. How are you? Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, dear." "Why? You sound worried." No, it's fine. Just. Mom, I might have accidentally sent you a voicemail meant for Sarah. Did it go to your answering machine?" I frowned. "A message?" "No, Nathan, I didn't hear anything. I just woke up, haven't even checked my messages yet." "Oh, thank goodness then." He exhaled with relief, and it wasn't just a breath, but a whole torrent of released tension. "I probably just pressed the wrong button. Delete it, don't listen. It's just silly nonsense." "All right, dear. I will. Don't worry. How's Sarah doing?" We talked for another 10 minutes, about the weather, his work, my garden. He sounded much calmer, but Evelyn, like any mother, felt the fine threads of anxiety hidden beneath his cheerful voice. Something was off. My curiosity, usually dormant, suddenly awakened. After hanging up, I didn't immediately delete the message. Instead, my finger, as if guided by an invisible force, pressed the play button. A short beep. And then Nathan's voice. But it wasn't the voice I knew. It was a voice filled with tension, almost a rage I had never heard from him. "We can't let Evelyn find out about Daniel Thorne. She's seen too much, she knows too much. If she starts digging, everything will collapse. And this damn house, it still holds secrets." Silence. Then a click, and the message ended. I sat there, stunned. The coffee cup trembled in my hand, and I set it down on the table to keep from dropping it. Nathan's words swirled in my head, shattering the peaceful silence. Daniel Thorne. That name, it was like a lightning bolt, splitting a long-forgotten sky. It was from my deeply buried past, from those days when I was young, naive, and believed in fairy tales. That name was tied to one of the most painful and mysterious events of my youth, to the disappearance of a man who was once everything to me. My cozy world had crumbled. My life, which I thought was an open book, turned out to be a sealed mystery, each page written with a lie. And now, I had to solve that mystery. Because the echo from the past, which I thought was dead, had returned to claim its due. My heart, it seemed, pounded somewhere in my throat, deafening all other sounds. I closed my eyes, trying to ward off the suddenly overwhelming memories, but they, like malevolent ghosts, were already knocking at the door of my consciousness. The silence was broken. Forever. The silence that now enveloped me was utterly different from the comforting quiet I cherished. It was a vacuum, cold and sharp, sucking all the warmth and familiarity from my sunny porch. Daniel Thorne. The name reverberated in my mind, an unwelcome guest that had suddenly kicked down the door to a room I had sealed off decades ago. Who was he to Nathan? Why couldn't I know about him? And what did my house, my beloved, unthreatening home, have to do with it? This damn house, it still holds secrets. The words played on a loop, each repetition chiseling away at the foundations of my perceived reality. I tried to make sense of it, to piece together fragments of memory. Daniel Thorne. A face emerged, hazy at first, then sharper. A young man with eyes that held both mischief and an unsettling depth, a smile that promised adventure and perhaps a touch of danger. He was a wanderer, a charmer, who had drifted into our sleepy town during my college years, turning heads and hearts wherever he went. Mine, most certainly. Our brief, intense connection had burned brightly, consuming all my youthful idealism, only to extinguish itself with his abrupt, unexplained disappearance. Everyone said he simply left town, chasing some new thrill or escaping some petty trouble. I had eventually married Robert, built a life, and buried Daniel deep within the archives of my past, labeling him a youthful folly, a forgotten chapter. Now, Nathan had ripped that chapter open. My hands, usually steady, trembled as I poured myself another cup of coffee, the warmth doing little to thaw the sudden chill in my bones. My perfect son. My perfect family. My perfect life. All dissolving before my eyes like a watercolor painting caught in the rain. I needed answers, but where to begin? My gaze drifted around the living room, a sanctuary filled with cherished objects, each with its own story. The antique grandfather clock, a wedding gift from Robert's parents. The worn armchair where Nathan used to read to me as a boy. The mantelpiece adorned with family photographs. Everything suddenly seemed imbued with a new, unsettling quality, as if these inanimate objects were silently judging me, whispering secrets I had been too blind to see. I walked slowly, almost reverently, to the old mahogany desk in the corner, a piece inherited from my own grandmother. Its drawers held a lifetime of ephemera, old letters, faded greeting cards, forgotten utility bills, and a jumble of sentimental odds and ends. Perhaps a clue, a forgotten photograph, a letter from Daniel might be hidden amongst them. My heart pounded a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I began to sift through the contents, my fingers brushing over yellowed postcards from distant relatives, report cards from Nathan's school days, and recipes scrawled on brittle paper. Nothing. Just the detritus of a well-lived, ordinary life. Frustration mounted, a frantic energy building inside me. I was searching for a ghost in a pile of domestic history. Then, tucked away at the very bottom of a deep drawer, beneath a pile of old linens, my fingers brushed against something hard and leathery. It was an old photo album, its cover faded and dusty, the kind with thick, black pages and sticky corners. I hadn't opened it in decades. A forgotten relic. With a surge of adrenaline, I pulled it out. The album felt heavy in my hands, a testament to the passage of time. I opened it carefully, the dry adhesive of the page protectors cracking faintly. Pictures of Robert and me as newlyweds, Nathan as a baby, family vacations. All the expected, cherished memories. My eyes scanned each page, searching, hoping for something, anything connected to Daniel. There were no photographs of Daniel. Not a single one. It was as if he had been systematically erased from my visual history. But then, on one of the very last pages, tucked behind a picture of Nathan's 5th birthday party, a loose, discolored clipping caught my eye. It was from an old newspaper, clearly cut out by hand, the edges brittle and torn. The date was almost 50 years ago. The headline, stark and impersonal, read, "Unidentified body found in woods near town." The article itself was brief, lacking details, simply reporting the discovery of male remains by hikers, with no immediate identification possible. My breath hitched. Unidentified body. Woods near town. 50 years ago. Could it be Daniel? The thought was a sickening lurch in my stomach. The article offered no clues as to the identity, no mention of any missing persons report that matched. Just a cold, anonymous tragedy. My husband had kept this. Why? The ringing of the phone startled me, pulling me back to the present with a jolt. It was Nathan again. My blood ran cold. He was calling to check on me, or more likely, to ensure I hadn't heard that message. I took a deep, shaky breath, composing myself. This was a game, and I had to play it. "Hello, darling," I answered, trying to inject my voice with my usual calm, cheerful tone. "Mom, hey. Just checking in. Did you happen to check your messages? That one I mentioned, did it come through?" His voice, despite the casual attempt, was laced with an undeniable tension, a forced lightness that grated on my newly sharpened senses. "Oh, that old thing?" I chuckled, a dry sound even to my own ears. "Yes, it popped up. I just deleted it without listening, as you asked. Too much tech for an old woman like me to bother with, darling. I prefer my books." A palpable sigh of relief escaped him, even through the phone line. "Good, good. Just making sure. Wouldn't want you getting confused by my rambling." "Not at all, dear. Everything's just fine here. The roses are doing beautifully." We ended the call, but my heart was still hammering. He had swallowed my lie, hook, line, and sinker. But the relief in his voice, though subtle, was a stark confirmation. He was hiding something. Something significant. And it was irrevocably linked to Daniel Thorne. My Daniel. My past. My supposedly quiet, unremarkable life. My silent world had just announced a coming storm, and I, Evelyn Reed, was standing right in its eye. The old house, once my sanctuary, now felt like a cage of secrets. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the ancient pipes seemed to mock my former tranquility. I clutched the faded newspaper clipping in my hand, its brittle edges threatening to crumble. Unidentified body found in woods near town. 50 years ago. The same year Daniel Thorne had vanished without a trace. The coincidence was too stark, too chilling to ignore. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. My mind raced, tumbling through the labyrinth of time. Daniel. He had been a whirlwind, a beautiful, dangerous storm in the quiet harbor of my youth. I was a literature student then, all poetry and romantic ideals, hungry for experience beyond the neatly trimmed hedges of our suburban town. Daniel was everything my steady, reliable Robert wasn't. He was unpredictable, a drifter with a charming smile and a glint of recklessness in his eyes. He spoke of faraway places, of adventures, of living life outside the lines. And I, mesmerized, had listened. Our romance, if one could call such a brief, intense entanglement that, was a clandestine affair. My parents, staunch pillars of the community, would have disapproved vehemently. Robert, my steady boyfriend at the time, was oblivious. Daniel and I would meet in secret, in the shadowed corners of the local diner, or on moonlit drives down winding country roads. He never spoke much of his past, always deflecting with a laugh or a cryptic remark. I was too smitten, too naive, to question it. Then, one day, he was simply gone. Vanished. The town gossiped for a week or two, then moved on. I mourned in silence, eventually picking up the pieces and marrying Robert, convincing myself it had merely been a foolish infatuation. But deep down, a flicker of an unanswered question always remained. Now, that flicker was a raging inferno. Nathan's words. The secret photograph. The newspaper clipping. They were all threads weaving into a tapestry of deceit, one I was desperate to unravel. Despite my age, a surprising surge of resolve, a steel spine I rarely knew I possessed, straightened my posture. I was no longer just Evelyn Reed, retired English teacher. I was a detective, albeit an amateur one, thrust into a cold case that threatened to consume my entire life. My first thought was Bet Donovan. My oldest friend, a delightful busybody with a memory like an elephant and a penchant for gossip. If anyone knew the hidden currents beneath the town's placid surface, it was Bet. I picked up the phone, my fingers trembling slightly. Bet, darling, it's Evelyn, I began, forcing a lightness into my voice. Evelyn. To what do I owe this pleasure? Don't tell me you've finally decided to join my bridge club. Betty's voice, as always, was boisterous and cheerful. Not today, dear. But I was thinking. I was going through some old photographs this morning, got all nostalgic. Do you remember that young man, Daniel Thorne, who was in town for a spell, must be 50 years ago now? I tried to make it sound like an idle reminiscence. A beat of silence on the other end. Daniel Thorne? Oh, him. Betty's tone shifted, a subtle darkening. Yes, I remember. Caused quite a stir, didn't he? A bit of a troublemaker, if you ask me. Always felt like he was up to no good. Yes, he certainly had a way about him, I mused, pushing. He disappeared so suddenly, didn't he? Any idea what happened to him, Bet? I never did hear the full story. Oh, who knows, Evelyn. He was bad news, that one. Probably skipped town owing money to someone. Best not to dwell on such characters, dear. How are your prize-winning petunias doing this year? Betty's quick change of subject was not lost on me. It was too abrupt, too dismissive. She clearly didn't want to talk about Daniel. Had she genuinely forgotten, or was she deliberately evading the topic? I sensed a wall, subtle yet firm. I thanked her, promising to call again soon, and hung up, feeling a fresh wave of frustration. Even Bet, my candid, gossipy friend, had secrets. I returned to the desk, drawn by an inexplicable pull. If Daniel had been erased from my photo album, if Bet shut down at his name, then the secrets must run deeper than simple small-town gossip. My eyes fell upon a small, intricately carved wooden box on my husband's side of the desk. I'd seen it countless times, assumed it contained old pens or paper clips. But today, something made me reach for it. It was locked. A sharp gasp escaped my lips. Robert never had secrets from me. Or so I thought. Where would he keep a key for such a box? My mind raced through old hiding spots, forgotten nooks. I checked under the desk blotter, behind the loose brick in the fireplace, even in the false bottom of a decorative vase. Nothing. Then, a flicker of memory. Robert's old study, which I had barely touched since his passing, now serving as a glorified storage room. He had a habit of putting spare keys in odd places. I walked down the hall, my heart thrumming with anticipation. In his old, dusty writing desk, a relic he'd inherited from his father, I began to search. Old ledgers, dried-up inkwells, faded letters. And then, nestled inside a forgotten humidor, amongst dried tobacco leaves, was a tiny, ornate key. My fingers trembled as I inserted the key into the lock of the wooden box. With a soft click, it opened. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was not what I expected. Not cash, not jewels. Just a single old, but remarkably well-preserved photograph. It was taken outdoors, on a bright, sunny day. A younger Robert, looking strong and serious, stood arm in arm with a much younger Nathan, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, grinning broadly. And standing beside them, his arm around Nathan's shoulder, a familiar, unmistakable figure, Daniel Thorne. All three of them, smiling, stood in front of my house, as it looked in its younger days. The house where I now lived. My blood ran cold. The photograph dropped from my numb fingers, clattering softly onto the desk. Robert, Nathan, and Daniel Thorne. All together. And on the back, in Robert's neat, unmistakable handwriting, scrawled in faded ink, our shared secret. The silence of the house pressed in on me, no longer comforting, but suffocating. My husband, the man I loved, the father of my son, had not only known Daniel Thorne, but had been close enough to him to be pictured with him and their son. And they had a shared secret. A secret that Nathan, in his accidental voicemail, was desperate to keep from me. A secret involving Daniel Thorne. And this house. My world was not merely cracking, it was shattering into a million sharp, unforgiving pieces. And at the heart of it all was my perfect family, built on a foundation of lies. The photograph lay on the desk like a gauntlet thrown, challenging every memory I held sacred. My husband, Robert, standing beside Daniel Thorne, their arms almost touching, a younger Nathan grinning innocently between them, all in front of our home. And Robert's ominous inscription, our shared secret. It was a betrayal so profound, so absolute, it hollowed me out. The Robert the first knew, the steady, honest man who was my bedrock, could not possibly have been entangled in anything clandestine, especially with Daniel Thorne, a man he supposedly never knew. Yet, here was the irrefutable evidence. My mind reeled. All those years. All those quiet evenings, all those shared laughs, all those intimate moments. Had he always carried this burden, this lie, beneath his calm demeanor? Had I been living with a ghost, a stranger, all this time? A bitter taste filled my mouth. I felt foolish, blind, perhaps even complicit in my ignorance. The realization that my own husband had been involved with Daniel Thorne, and that Nathan was now caught in the web, solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about youthful folly anymore. This was about a decades-old deception that permeated the very fabric of my family. I had to know the truth, no matter how ugly, no matter how painful. The illusion of my perfect family was already shattered, now I needed to see what lay beneath the broken shards. Just as I was trying to gather my thoughts, the doorbell chimed. A jolt went through me. Nathan and Sarah. They rarely visited unannounced. My heart pounded with a mix of dread and a strange, perverse anticipation. They were here, no doubt, to gauge my reaction, to ensure their secret was still safe. I quickly snatched the photograph and the newspaper clipping, shoving them back into the wooden box and locking it, placing it carefully back in the desk drawer. My poker face, honed over years of managing rambunctious students and overly dramatic PTA meetings, was about to be put to its ultimate test. I smoothed my dress and walked to the door, a faint tremor in my hands. Evelyn, darling. Sarah's voice, usually a soothing melody, grated on my ears. She embraced me, her hug a little too tight, a little too long. We were just passing by and thought we'd surprise you. Nathan followed, his smile bright but his eyes, I noticed, darted quickly around the living room, a subtle scan for anything out of place. Mom, you look wonderful. Are you doing all right? Just peachy, dear, I replied, forcing a smile that felt like stretching cold clay. Come in, come in. What a lovely surprise. We settled into the living room, the same room where Robert, Nathan, and Daniel had stood in that photograph. The irony was a punch to the gut. Sarah launched into a cheerful monologue about a new interior design project, while Nathan kept interjecting with overly solicitous questions about my health, my garden, anything to keep the conversation light. But his gaze kept returning to the desk, to the very drawer where the wooden box now lay hidden. He was searching. He knew something was there, or suspected it. You know, the mom, Nathan said, leaning forward slightly, his tone casual, this old house. It's got so much character, but all these old things, so much clutter, don't you think? Maybe it's time to think about clearing some of it out. For your own comfort, of course. Get rid of anything you don't really need. His words were cloaked in concern, but I heard the underlying message loud and clear. He wants me to clean out the evidence. He wants me to stop digging. He was trying to steer me away, to subtly discourage any further exploration into the hidden corners of my home. The subtext was a suffocating presence in the room. "Oh, Nathan, darling, these aren't just things," I said, my voice carefully modulated. "These are memories. Every piece tells a story. And some stories," I added, meeting his gaze directly, "are just waiting to be told." A flicker of unease crossed his face, a quick shadow that Sarah didn't seem to notice, busy as she was admiring a porcelain figurine. He quickly recovered, forcing a chuckle. "Of course, Mom. You're right. Just thinking of you." They stayed for an hour, their conversation a careful dance around the elephant in the room. When they finally left, the sense of relief was immense, but it was quickly replaced by a chilling certainty. My son, my own flesh and blood, was actively trying to conceal a deep, dark secret that involved murder, my husband, and a dead man from my past. That night, sleep refused to come. Every shadow in the house seemed to lengthen, every creak more ominous. I lay awake, replaying Nathan's words, his nervous glance, his transparent attempt to persuade me to declutter. They weren't just guessing, they were looking for something specific. Something they feared I might stumble upon. Then, a sudden, cold realization washed over me. When Nathan had looked at the desk, his eyes hadn't just scanned the surface, they had lingered. And earlier, when I'd been in the kitchen making tea, I remembered hearing a faint click, like a drawer being gently closed. I had dismissed it then, attributing it to the house settling. Now, a sick feeling twisted in my gut. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet padding silently on the cool floorboards. The moonlight streamed through the living room windows, casting an eerie glow. I walked to the desk, my heart thumping against my ribs. The wooden box was where I'd left it, locked, nestled in the drawer. But as my fingers grazed the top of the desk, they brushed against something unmistakably out of place. A small, almost imperceptible scratch on the polished surface, right next to the drawer pull. A mark I hadn't noticed before. And the faint, metallic scent of something recently handled. Someone had been in the drawer. Someone had tried to open the box. Nathan. Or Sarah. Perhaps both. They hadn't just been visiting, they had been searching. My house was no longer a sanctuary. It was a hunting ground, and I, Evelyn Reed, was either the hunter or the hunted. The chill that ran through me was not from the night air, but from the sudden, stark realization that my own family posed a threat, and my home, once my fortress, had been breached. The danger was not a ghost from the past, it was very much alive, and it walked among us. The photograph lay on the desk like a gauntlet thrown, challenging every memory I held sacred. My husband, Robert, standing beside Daniel Thorne, their arms almost touching, a younger Nathan grinning innocently between them, all in front of our home. And Robert's ominous inscription, "Our shared secret." It was a betrayal so profound, so absolute, it hollowed me out. The Robert the First knew, the steady, honest man who was my bedrock, could not possibly have been entangled in anything clandestine, especially with Daniel Thorne, a man he supposedly never knew. Yet, here was the irrefutable evidence. My mind reeled. All those years. All those quiet evenings, all those shared laughs, all those intimate moments. Had he always carried this burden, this lie, beneath his calm demeanor? Had I been living with a ghost, a stranger, all this time? A bitter taste filled my mouth. I felt foolish, blind, perhaps even complicit in my ignorance. The realization that my own husband had been involved with Daniel Thorne, and that Nathan was now caught in the web, solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about youthful folly anymore. This was about a decades-old deception that permeated the very fabric of my family. I had to know the truth, no matter how ugly, no matter how painful. The illusion of my perfect family was already shattered, now I needed to see what lay beneath the broken shards. Just as I was trying to gather my thoughts, the doorbell chimed. A jolt went through me. Nathan and Sarah. They rarely visited unannounced. My heart pounded with a mix of dread and a strange, perverse anticipation. They were here, no doubt, to gauge my reaction, to ensure their secret was still safe. I quickly snatched the photograph and the newspaper clipping, shoving them back into the wooden box and locking it, placing it carefully back in the desk drawer. My poker face, honed over years of managing rambunctious students and overly dramatic PTA meetings, was about to be put to its ultimate test. I smoothed my dress and walked to the door, a faint tremor in my hands. Evelyn, darling. Sarah's voice, usually a soothing melody, grated on my ears. She embraced me, her hug a little too tight, a little too long. We were just passing by and thought we'd surprise you. Nathan followed, his smile bright but his eyes, I noticed, darted quickly around the living room, a subtle scan for anything out of place. Mom, you look wonderful. Are you doing all right? Just peachy, dear, I replied, forcing a smile that felt like stretching cold clay. Come in, come in. What a lovely surprise. We settled into the living room, the same room where Robert, Nathan, and Daniel had stood in that photograph. The irony was a punch to the gut. Sarah launched into a cheerful monologue about a new interior design project, while Nathan kept interjecting with overly solicitous questions about my health, my garden, anything to keep the conversation light. But his gaze kept returning to the desk, to the very drawer where the wooden box now lay hidden. He was searching. He knew something was there, or suspected it. You know, the mom, Nathan said, leaning forward slightly, his tone casual, this old house. It's got so much character, but all these old things, so much clutter, don't you think? Maybe it's time to think about clearing some of it out. For your own comfort, of course. Get rid of anything you don't really need. His words were cloaked in concern, but I heard the underlying message loud and clear. He wants me to clean out the evidence. He wants me to stop digging. He was trying to steer me away, to subtly discourage any further exploration into the hidden corners of my home. The subtext was a suffocating presence in the room. Oh, Nathan, darling, these aren't just things, I said, my voice carefully modulated. These are memories. Every piece tells a story. And some stories, I added, meeting his gaze directly, are just waiting to be told. A flicker of unease crossed his face, a quick shadow that Sarah didn't seem to notice, busy as she was admiring a porcelain figurine. He quickly recovered, forcing a chuckle. Of course, Mom. You're right. Just thinking of you. They stayed for an hour, their conversation a careful dance around the elephant in the room. When they finally left, the sense of relief was immense, but it was quickly replaced by a chilling certainty. My son, my own flesh and blood, was actively trying to conceal a deep, dark secret that involved murder, my husband, and a dead man from my past. That night, sleep refused to come. Every shadow in the house seemed to lengthen, every creak more ominous. I lay awake, replaying Nathan's words, his nervous glance, his transparent attempt to persuade me to declutter. They weren't just guessing, they were looking for something specific. Something they feared I might stumble upon. Then, a sudden, cold realization washed over me. When Nathan had looked at the desk, his eyes hadn't just scanned the surface, they had lingered. And earlier, when I'd been in the kitchen making tea, I remembered hearing a faint click, like a drawer being gently closed. I had dismissed it then, attributing it to the house settling. Now, a sick feeling twisted in my gut. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet padding silently on the cool floorboards. The moonlight streamed through the living room windows, casting an eerie glow. I walked to the desk, my heart thumping against my ribs. The wooden box was where I'd left it, locked, nestled in the drawer. But as my fingers grazed the top of the desk, they brushed against something unmistakably out of place. A small, almost imperceptible scratch on the polished surface, right next to the drawer pull. A mark I hadn't noticed before. And the faint, metallic scent of something recently handled. Someone had been in the drawer. Someone had tried to open the box. Nathan. Or Sarah. Perhaps both. They hadn't just been visiting, they had been searching. My house was no longer a sanctuary. It was a hunting ground, and I, Evelyn Reed, was either the hunter or the hunted. The chill that ran through me was not from the night air, but from the sudden, stark realization that my own family posed a threat, and my home, once my fortress, had been breached. The danger was not a ghost from the past, it was very much alive, and it walked among us. The scratch on the desk, the faint scent of metal, tangible proof that my quiet home had been violated, not by strangers, but by those I loved. The realization was a cold, hard stone in my chest. Nathan and Sarah. They hadn't just come to check on me, they'd come to search, to ensure I hadn't found whatever it was they were so desperate to hide. And they had. The knowledge sharpened my senses, transforming my fear into a steely resolve. I would not be deterred. If my son believed he could manipulate me, he was gravely mistaken. I was a woman of 72, yes, but I was also a former English teacher, adept at uncovering hidden meanings and dissecting complex narratives. This was my story now, and I would write its ending. My first order of business was to revisit the past, but this time with a clear, critical eye. The local library was my next stop. It was a haven of quiet contemplation for me, a place where I often lost myself in the pages of biographies or historical accounts. Today, however, my mission was far more personal, far more urgent. The library was almost empty, save for a few students hunched over laptops and a perpetually tired librarian, Martha, whom I knew by sight. I made my way to the microfiche readers, relics of a bygone era, now largely ignored in favor of digital archives. But for local history, especially 50-year-old local history, the microfiche was often the most reliable source. I pulled out drawers of tiny film reels, each spool containing decades of our town's forgotten daily news. I started with the year Daniel Thorne vanished, 1973. My fingers, surprisingly agile, worked the ancient machine, scrolling through grainy images of headlines and local advertisements. My eyes scanned for any mention of Daniel Thorne, any follow-up to the unidentified body article I'd found. Weeks flew by in those tiny, illuminated frames, headlines about the energy crisis, local bake sales, high school football games. The mundane details of life continued even as my world was secretly being torn apart. I found a few scattered mentions of Daniel Thorne, a police blotter entry for minor disturbance at the Anchor Tavern, a small paragraph about him being questioned in connection with a series of small-time cons. He was portrayed as a drifter, a charming rogue with a knack for getting into trouble. And then, a brief, almost dismissive article stating he was missing after failing to appear for a court summons. The general consensus, as reflected in the local paper, was that he had simply skipped town, fleeing his petty debts and minor misdemeanors. No one seemed to have cared enough to look for him. No official investigation. No widespread concern. And most strikingly, no connection whatsoever to the unidentified body found in the woods. The body was discovered just weeks after Daniel's disappearance, yet the newspaper made no link. It was as if two separate narratives were unfolding simultaneously in the same town, yet never intersecting. This discrepancy gnawed at me. Why wasn't a connection made? Was it an oversight? Or deliberate obfuscation? My eyes were tired, my back ached, but I pressed on. Then, a new name caught my attention in one of the articles from 1974, a year after Daniel's disappearance. It was a small piece, buried deep in the business section, reporting the death of a local businessman named Leo Cullen. The article mentioned his construction company, Cullen & Sons, and briefly noted its significant contracts in the area during the early 70s, including several new housing developments on the outskirts of town. The outskirts of town. My home was built on the outskirts of town, precisely during that period. A chill ran down my spine. The pieces were starting to connect, forming a pattern that was far more sinister than I had ever imagined. The article subtly hinted at Cullen's colorful past and associates of dubious reputation, euphemisms I understood to mean organized crime connections. Leo Cullen was known, even in our quiet town, as a man to avoid, a shadowy figure whose legitimate businesses were whispered to be fronts for something far dirtier. A light bulb flickered in my mind. Daniel Thorne, the petty con artist, getting involved with a notorious crime figure like Leo Cullen? It made a twisted kind of sense. Daniel always had a nose for trouble and an eye for opportunity. And if Cullen's company was building houses, specifically my house, at the time Daniel disappeared. I stared at the microfiche, the flickering image of the old newspaper article seeming to mock me. My husband, Robert, had been involved with Daniel. Daniel had disappeared around the time of an unidentified body being found, and around the time Leo Cullen's construction company was building houses near where Daniel was last seen. And Nathan's message, "This damn house, it still holds secrets." My stomach churned. The logical conclusion, cold and stark, landed with the weight of a granite slab. If Daniel Thorne was involved with a known crime boss, and my husband was involved with Daniel, then my husband could have been involved in something far more serious than a shared secret. He could have been involved in a crime. A terrible crime. And the most terrifying thought of all, if Daniel's body was the unidentified one, and it was never linked to his disappearance, then someone had gone to great lengths to ensure that connection was never made. And that someone could have been my husband. The weight of this possibility, this horrifying truth, pressed down on me, threatening to suffocate me. My son, Nathan, a successful lawyer, a respected member of the community, was protecting this secret. He was trying to keep me from finding out about Daniel Thorne. Was he merely protecting his father's memory? Or was his involvement deeper? Was he complicit in a decades-old cover-up? The moral dilemma ripped through me. Protect my son, the only family I had left, or unearth the gruesome truth, no matter the cost to us all. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I couldn't choose silence any longer. The ghosts of the past demanded their justice, and I, Evelyn Reed, was now their unwilling, yet determined, advocate. The cold facts gleaned from the library had formed a suffocating loop around my heart. Leo Cullen, a man synonymous with whispered corruption, Daniel Thorne, the charming rogue, and my husband, Robert, the pillar of our community. All tangled in a web spun decades ago, leading directly to the foundation of my own home. The thought was a relentless hum in my mind, echoing the drone of the microfiche reader. I needed to talk to Bet again, but this time, without the pretense of casual nostalgia. This time, I would be direct. I found Bet in her sun-drenched kitchen, meticulously arranging dried lavender into sachets. The air was fragrant, peaceful, a stark contrast to the turmoil within me. She greeted me with her usual warm smile, offering tea and a plate of her famous lemon shortbread. I accepted mechanically, my mind already rehearsing the difficult conversation ahead. Bet, I began, my voice steadier than I expected, I need to talk to you about something serious. Something from the past. Her smile faltered slightly. Oh, Evelyn, dear, is everything all right? You look drawn. No, everything is not all right. It's about Daniel Thorne. And Robert. I paused, watching her face closely. The casual dismissal I'd received over the phone was gone. In its place, a flicker of apprehension, a tightening around her mouth. What about them? She asked, her voice softer, laced with a tremor I hadn't heard before. I pulled out the old photograph from the wooden box, which I'd carefully brought with me. The one showing Robert, Nathan, and Daniel Thorne, all together in front of my house. I placed it on her kitchen table, between us, like a silent accusation. Betty's eyes widened, then her face went ashen. She picked up the photograph, her fingers tracing the youthful faces. Oh, my heavens, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I haven't seen this in so long. Bet Robert kept this locked away. And on the back, he wrote our shared secret. Daniel Thorne disappeared, and an unidentified body was found not long after. My son, Nathan, is desperately trying to keep me from knowing anything about Daniel. What is going on? I pressed, my voice firm, allowing no room for evasion. What did Robert and Daniel get involved in? And what does it have to do with Leo Cullen? Bet took a long, shaky breath, her gaze fixed on the photograph, a lifetime of secrets suddenly weighing on her. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and sorrow. Evelyn, you don't know the half of it. Robert, he wasn't always the man you thought he was. Not entirely. She pushed the plate of shortbread away, her appetite clearly gone. Daniel Thorne, he was always trouble. A charming rogue, yes, but he had a dangerous streak. He wasn't just doing those petty cons. He was dabbling in much bigger things, always looking for the quick score. And he had a talent for finding weaknesses, for sniffing out dirty money. Bet leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He got involved with Leo Cullen. Oh, it was all very hush-hush, but everyone in town knew to stay away from Cullen. He was running money through his construction company, turning dirty cash into clean bricks and mortar. He was building houses, legitimate fronts, but burying his real wealth in plain sight. My blood ran cold. Burying his wealth? What do you mean? He had a system, Bet explained, her eyes darting nervously towards the window. He'd hide cash, sometimes even valuable documents, in the foundations of the houses he was building. Little caches, meant to be dug up later, untraceable. And Daniel, somehow, he stumbled onto it. He saw something, maybe heard something. He was working for Cullen for a short while, doing odd jobs, always trying to worm his way in. And Robert? I asked, my voice tight with dread. How did Robert get involved? Bet wrung her hands. Robert, he was young, Evelyn. And he was friends with Daniel. Not best friends, perhaps, but they socialized, played poker. Daniel was very charismatic, remember? And Robert, he was ambitious. He saw Daniel's connections, maybe even envied his daring. Daniel convinced Robert to help him. To keep an eye on things, to maybe even access some of those hidden caches. He was stealing from Cullen? I gasped, horrified. My Robert, a thief? Not stealing, not exactly, Bet clarified, at least not at first. More like, confirming Daniel's suspicions. Daniel was planning to expose Cullen, to blackmail him with what he knew. And he needed someone on the inside, someone respectable, to verify his claims. Robert, naive as he was, got drawn in. He thought he was just helping a friend, maybe getting a cut of some quick cash. He didn't realize the depth of the waters he was treading. And then Daniel disappeared, I prompted, the words catching in my throat. Yes, Bet breathed, her eyes welling up. One day, he was just gone. Everyone assumed he'd finally gotten himself into real trouble with Cullen, or that he'd taken whatever money he could find and run. But I always suspected worse. Daniel wasn't the type to just vanish without a word, especially not to those he confided in. And the way Robert acted afterwards, he was different. Distant. He never spoke of Daniel again, not even to me. He just buried himself in work, in his family. You think Robert killed him? The words were out before I could stop them, raw and agonizing. Bet averted her gaze. I don't know, Evelyn. I truly don't. But I know that Daniel was going to expose Cullen, and he was also going to expose anyone who helped him, even inadvertently. And Robert, he had everything to lose. His reputation, his future, your family. A fresh wave of nausea swept over me. My Robert, an accessory to theft, possibly to murder. My secure, stable world dissolving into a mire of criminality and deceit. Daniel had threatened to expose not just Cullen, but my husband. And my husband, to protect his nascent family, his future, his carefully constructed life, had made a choice. A terrible, irreversible choice. The house. This damn house, it still holds secrets. Daniel had been involved with Cullen's construction. Robert was involved with Daniel. And my house was one of those properties built by Cullen. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The identified body. Daniel Thorne. And the deepest, darkest secret of all, buried not just in the past, but beneath the very home where I had built my life, raised my son, and believed I was safe. The ground beneath my feet felt unsteady, as if the earth itself was preparing to swallow me whole. My journey into the past had unearthed not just a secret, but a crime. And the man I loved, the father of my son, was at its chilling heart. Betty's revelations hung heavy in the air, a noxious cloud that stole the lightness from the sun-drenched kitchen. My friend, usually so vibrant, sat hunched, a shadow of her former self, burdened by the terrible confession she had just made. I felt no anger towards her, only a profound sorrow that she, too, had carried this knowledge for so long, a silent accomplice to the town's collective amnesia. I drove home in a daze, the familiar streets blurring into an indistinguishable ribbon of asphalt. The house. My home. It wasn't just an old Victorian anymore, it was a tomb. A witness. A monument to a terrible act. Nathan's chilling voicemail echoed in my mind, this damn house, it still holds secrets. He wasn't wrong. It held the most terrible secret of all. I stepped through my front door, the familiar scent of beeswax and old wood now infused with something else, the faint, imaginary scent of decay, of forgotten sorrow. I looked around my living room, at the very spot where I'd sat for decades, ignorant, blissful. Now, every surface, every shadow, seemed to hum with the untold story of Daniel Thorne. My feet, as if guided by an unseen force, carried me towards the basement door. Robert had always been particular about the basement. "Too damp for your books, Eve," he'd say with a dismissive wave of his hand whenever I suggested converting it. "Better just leave it for storage." He kept it meticulously organized, almost obsessively so, with everything in its place. He never allowed me to change anything down there, a subtle but firm boundary I never questioned. Now, it all made a horrifying kind of sense. He wasn't protecting me from dampness, he was protecting a secret. I opened the heavy wooden door, the squeal of the hinges a protest against the silence. The stairs descended into a cool, dusty gloom. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and old concrete. I flicked on the single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting long, dancing shadows across the uneven floor. The basement was just as I remembered it, shelves filled with neatly labeled boxes, old tools hanging on pegboards, a dormant furnace in the corner. But now, I saw it with new eyes. Not as a benign storage space, but as a potential crime scene. My gaze swept across the concrete floor, searching, assessing. Robert had poured this floor himself, proud of his handiwork. He had always been a skilled amateur builder, fixing things around the house, never hiring anyone unless absolutely necessary. He had even mentioned hiring a strong young helper for the heavy lifting when the foundation was being poured, around the time we moved in. A strong young helper. Daniel? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. My eyes narrowed, focusing on a specific spot in the far corner, near the old stone foundation. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to the casual observer. But I had spent decades in this house, observing every detail. The concrete there looked slightly different. A shade darker, perhaps. Or was it just the uneven light? The texture, too, seemed a little rougher, less uniform than the rest of the floor. And then I remembered Nathan's subtle clue from their last visit: in old houses always so much unnecessary trash, it's time to take it apart. He wasn't just talking about junk, he was talking about this spot. He knew. They knew. A fresh wave of anger, cold and righteous, coursed through me. My husband had built his life, our life, on a burial ground. He had smiled at me across the dinner table, kissed me goodnight, raised our son, all while a terrible secret lay entombed beneath our feet. And Nathan, my dear son, had known. He had been complicit in this silent horror, choosing to protect his father's monstrous legacy rather than bringing truth to light. The moral dilemma that had plagued me for days, protect my son or expose the truth, now clarified itself with devastating precision. There was no choice. The truth, however brutal, had to come out. For Daniel Thorne, whose life had been violently extinguished and whose memory had been buried beneath layers of deceit. For myself, for the woman who had lived a lie for 50 years. And even for Nathan, whose soul, I now suspected, was also trapped beneath the weight of this unbearable secret. I walked over to the suspicious patch of concrete, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. I knelt, my 72-year-old knees protesting, and ran my hand over the rough surface. Yes. It was definitely different. A patch, poorly disguised, a scar on the face of what was supposed to be a solid, honest foundation. This wasn't just a secret the house held, it was a secret the house had been forced to hold. My gaze lingered on the spot. I needed tools. A sledgehammer, a chisel. Something to break through this wall of concrete and silence. It would be physically demanding, probably impossible for me alone. But the thought of leaving Daniel Thorne buried beneath my feet, forever unheard, forever unmourned, was unbearable. He deserved more. He deserved justice. I rose slowly, my joints aching, but my spirit resolute. The quiet life I had so carefully cultivated was over. The pleasant dream was gone, replaced by a chilling nightmare. But within that nightmare, a fierce determination had been born. I would unearth the truth, piece by agonizing piece. For the first time in 50 years, the house would tell its story. And I, Evelyn Reed, would be its voice. The decision, once made, settled in my heart with a grim resolve. There was no turning back. The comfort of ignorance had been irrevocably stripped away, replaced by the heavy mantle of truth-seeking. Daniel Thorne, the victim of a brutal act committed by the man I loved, deserved to be freed from his concrete tomb. And I, Evelyn Reed, had an obligation to be his liberator. The next morning, I drove to the nearest hardware store, feeling an odd mix of nervousness and exhilaration. My usual purchases consisted of potting soil and birdseed. Today, I was buying a heavy-duty sledgehammer and a stout cold chisel. The young man at the counter, barely out of high school, looked at my frail frame and then at my purchases with a raised eyebrow. "Building a new patio, huh, ma'am?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Something like that, dear," I replied, managing a thin smile. "Just a bit of home improvement." The irony was not lost on me. I was about to dismantle not just a concrete floor, but the very foundation of my life. Back at the house, I changed into an old pair of gardening overalls, my movements stiff, but my purpose clear. The weight of the sledgehammer felt foreign in my hands, unwieldy and powerful. My 72 years had not prepared me for this kind of physical exertion, but a fierce energy coursed through my veins, fueled by anger, grief, and an unyielding demand for justice. I descended into the basement, the single bulb casting its harsh light on the suspicious patch of concrete. My heart hammered against my ribs, a drumbeat for the buried truth. This was it. The point of no return. I raised the sledgehammer, its weight straining my aging muscles, and brought it down with a grunt. Crack. The sound echoed loudly in the confined space, a jarring violation of the house's long-held silence. A small chip of concrete flew across the room. Again. And again. The work was grueling, slow, and arduous. My hands blistered, my arms ached, sweat trickled down my temples, stinging my eyes. Each blow against the cold, unyielding concrete was a blow against the deceit, against the silence, against the comfortable lies I had lived for so long. I thought of Daniel Thorne, his vibrant life cut short, buried and forgotten. I thought of Robert, his secret festering, poisoning our marriage from within. I thought of Nathan, struggling to uphold a terrible legacy. These thoughts propelled me forward, giving me strength I didn't know I possessed. Hours crawled by. The patch of discolored concrete slowly began to yield, crumbling into dust and jagged chunks. Beneath the first layer, I found a darker, rougher pour, evidence of a hastily covered-up job. I chipped away relentlessly, the chisel scraping against unseen resistance. Then, the chisel struck something softer. Not earth, not rock. Something yielding, yet resilient. My breath caught in my throat. I dropped the hammer, grabbing the chisel and working with frantic, desperate energy. A piece of old canvas, thick and stained, slowly emerged from the dust. And beneath it, a sickening dread washed over me as the faint, unmistakable odor of decay reached my nostrils, mingling with the musty smell of the basement. My hands trembled as I pulled away more of the concrete and canvas. What lay beneath was a skeletal hand, bone-white and brittle, reaching out from the earth, frozen in a silent plea. I recoiled, a choked gasp escaping my lips, tears streaming down my dirt-smudged face. It was true. All of it. Daniel Thorne. He was here, beneath my house, beneath my feet, after all these years. With a morbid fascination, a perverse need to see the full horror, I continued to clear away the debris. Slowly, the entire skeleton was revealed, wrapped tightly in a canvas tarp, held in place by rusted ropes. It was clear the body had been deliberately concealed, hurriedly buried in the fresh foundation of the house. Beside the skeletal remains, tucked within the folds of the tarp, lay two objects. A tarnished, rusted Zippo lighter, its metal corroded by time and moisture. With trembling fingers, I wiped away the grime. On its side, engraved in elegant script, were the initials, D.T. Daniel Thorne. And then, a satchel. Old, leather, surprisingly intact. My hands shook as I unzipped it. Inside, neatly stacked, were wads of money, yellowed and brittle with age, tied with twine. Hundreds, maybe thousands, of dollars. And beneath the money, a small stack of documents. Old deeds, ledgers, some personal letters, all damp-stained but legible. One document, folded and tucked into an envelope, stood out. It was a letter, addressed to Robert, and signed D. I unfolded it carefully, my heart pounding in my ears. The handwriting was bold, defiant. Robert. I know what you're doing. I know about Cullen's money, and I know about your little side operation. You're skimming, aren't you? Helping yourself to a slice of Cullen's pie while he thinks you're just a loyal helper. I saw the ledgers you kept, the ones you thought no one would find. You're deeper in this than you pretend. Don't think I haven't noticed. You think I'm just a fool, a petty crook? I know what you're trying to build here, a life of respectability, a family. And you're willing to compromise everything for a few dirty dollars. Well, that's not going to happen. Not on my watch. I'm giving Cullen the full story tomorrow. And guess what, Robert? Your name will be right there, next to his. I'll expose his operation, and I'll expose you right along with it. Unless, of course, you're willing to make a very different kind of deal. Meet me tonight, at the site. Midnight. Come alone. We need to talk. This is your last chance. D. The letter dropped from my hands, fluttering onto the dusty concrete. The truth, stark and brutal, now lay bare before me. Robert, my husband, the man I had loved and honored, was not merely involved in a shared secret. He was a thief, embezzling from a crime boss, and, when threatened with exposure by Daniel Thorne, he had committed murder. He had killed Daniel, right here, on the very site of their future home, and buried him beneath the foundations he was so meticulously constructing. He had built our life, our entire family, on a grave. The shock was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. My Robert. My life. My world. All reduced to ash. The silence of the basement, once broken by the frantic blows of my hammer, was now filled with the deafening roar of shattered illusions. And then, a new sound. Footsteps on the stairs, hesitant at first, then quickening. A voice, full of trepidation, calling my name. Mom? Mom, are you down here? It was Nathan. He was coming down. And he was about to see everything. The dark legacy, finally unearthed. Nathan's voice, usually a comforting sound, now pierced the air like a siren, signaling imminent disaster. I didn't have time to cover the gruesome scene, to hide the skeleton of Daniel Thorne, or the damning letter. He was already descending the last steps, his silhouette framed in the dim light of the doorway. He hadn't been able to reach me by phone, I realized. He was here because his anxiety, his desperate need to protect the secret, had driven him back to the house. His eyes, wide and filled with alarm, landed on me first, then slowly, hesitantly, drifted to the excavated concrete, to the exposed bones, to the Zippo lighter, and finally, to the letter clutched in my trembling hand. His face, usually so composed, crumpled. The color drained from it, leaving him pale and horrified. He looked like a child caught in the act of a terrible transgression. Mom, oh my God, Mom, he whispered, his voice hoarse, barely audible. He took a hesitant step forward, then another, until he stood over the grave, staring down at the unearthed past. Sarah appeared behind him, her face mirroring his shock, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. You knew, I stated, my voice flat, devoid of emotion, a stark contrast to the earthquake raging within me. Both of you. You knew about Daniel Thorne. About what your father did. Nathan sank to his knees beside the grave, not out of reverence for the dead, but out of sheer physical and emotional collapse. Mom, please, let me explain. Explain what, Nathan? I retorted, my voice finally breaking, a tremor of fury running through it. Explain how your father, the man I loved, the pillar of this community, was a thief and a murderer? Explain how you lived with this lie, how you tried to make me live with it, to die with it. Tears streamed down Nathan's face, silent and heavy. After Dad died, I found his journal. He kept it hidden in his safe deposit box, away from everything. He had been sick for so long, Mom, and in his last months, with the cancer eating away at him, he wrote everything down. Every sordid detail. He wanted to unburden his soul before he left this world. He paused, struggling to compose himself, his voice thick with guilt and shame. He confessed it all. How he met Daniel, how Daniel showed him Cullen's operation, the money hidden in the foundations. Dad was struggling back then, trying to start his own business, and he was ambitious. Daniel convinced him they could take a cut, just a little, no one would notice. But Daniel got greedy. He found out Dad was also skimming, trying to build his own nest egg from Cullen's dirty money, not just helping Daniel. And Daniel was going to use that against him, too. He was going to expose Dad, not just Cullen. He threatened to tell everyone, to ruin Dad's life, his reputation, his future with you. He even threatened you and me, Mom. Nathan finally looked up at me, his eyes pleading. Dad was terrified. He said Daniel was unstable, dangerous. He saw everything he'd worked for, everything he was building with you, crumbling before his eyes. He met Daniel that night at the construction site, just like the letter says. Daniel was furious. They argued. Dad said Daniel lunged at him, that he hit him, with a heavy tool, something from the site. It was an accident, Mom, he swore it was self-defense. But then Daniel was dead. And Dad, he panicked. He couldn't go to the police. Not with Cullen involved, not with his own hand in the till. He buried Daniel right here, in the fresh concrete. He just wanted to make it all go away. Sarah, who had been listening in horrified silence, now found her voice. He was dying of guilt, Evelyn. He couldn't live with it, but he couldn't confess. He loved you too much to destroy your image of him. And you, Nathan? I asked, pointing a trembling finger at the unearthed skeleton. You found this out, and you chose to keep it buried? To let this man lie here, unmourned, for another 50 years? What was I supposed to do, Mom? He cried, his voice breaking. Turn in my own father? Destroy his memory, your peace of mind? You loved him, Mom. I loved him. I couldn't do it. I tried to find a way to honor his confession without bringing down the entire world on our heads. I even tried to access that money, the one in Daniel's satchel, not for myself, but to pay off anyone who might ever stumble onto this. To protect you, Mom, to protect our family from the consequences. That voicemail. Sarah wanted me to tell you. She kept pushing me to come clean, to let you know. But I was afraid, Mom. So afraid that it would kill you. The weight of his confession, the decades of his father's silent torment, his own desperate attempt to preserve a fractured legacy, washed over me. Nathan was not a murderer, but he was a man trapped by his father's sins, a man who had chosen to become an accomplice to silence. Sarah, in her own way, was also caught in this terrible web, trying to navigate the murky waters of family loyalty and moral imperative. My mind cleared, the fog of shock and anger slowly lifting, replaced by a cold, sharp certainty. This was not just about Robert, or Daniel, or even Nathan. This was about justice. About the truth. About choosing right over convenient comfort. My son, my flesh and blood, stood before me, broken and remorseful, but ultimately, complicit. I looked down at the skeleton, at Daniel Thorne, whose life had been stolen and whose memory had been erased. He deserved justice. And I, Evelyn Reed, was the only one left to give it to him. My hand, still trembling, reached for my phone. The phone Nathan had asked me to delete the message from. The phone that had started all of this. Mom, what are you doing? Nathan asked, his voice a raw plea. I met his gaze, my eyes firm, unwavering. I'm doing what your father should have done 50 years ago, Nathan. I'm telling the truth. My finger pressed the numbers. 911, the police. The law. The system that, however imperfect, was meant to bring justice. The house, after 50 years of silent suffering, would finally speak. And its truth would reverberate through the lives of everyone it touched. My choice was made. And the burden, though heavy, felt strangely liberating. The dispatcher's calm voice on the other end of the line was a stark contrast to the maelstrom of emotions raging within the basement. 911, what's your emergency? My name is Evelyn Reed, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the tremor in my hands. I've discovered human remains in the basement of my home. It's a very old case. I provided my address, the details flowing out with a chilling clarity. Nathan and Sarah watched me, their faces a mixture of horror, resignation, and a desperate, unspoken plea for me to reconsider. But the line had been crossed. The truth was out. Within minutes, the quiet residential street was transformed. Police cruisers, their blue and red lights flashing, illuminated the dusk. An ambulance, though I knew it was too late for one, waited silently. Detectives in plain clothes, forensic experts in protective suits, swarmed my house, my sacred home, now irrevocably a crime scene. Detective Adams, a young man with sharp, intelligent eyes and a weary demeanor, took charge. He listened patiently as I recounted the entire story, from the fateful voicemail to the unearthed skeleton, the Zippo lighter, and Daniel's letter. He listened without judgment, his pen scratching notes in a small pad, his gaze occasionally drifting to Nathan and Sarah, who sat silently on the living room couch, their faces drawn and pale. Nathan was taken into custody for obstruction of justice and accessory after the fact. He went without a struggle, his eyes meeting mine one last time, a look of profound sorrow and understanding passing between us. He had chosen to uphold a terrible legacy, and now he would pay the price. Sarah, tearful but resolute, stayed by my side, a surprising source of silent strength. She confessed her own struggle with Nathan to reveal the truth, her conscience clearly relieved by the raw honesty that had finally erupted. The house, once a repository of my quiet life, became a hive of activity. Forensic teams meticulously documented every detail, their flashlights probing the shadows, their voices low and professional. The concrete floor of my basement, where I had once stored canned goods and forgotten treasures, was now systematically dismantled, a macabre excavation. Daniel Thorne's remains were carefully removed, finally granted the dignity of a proper burial and identification. The news spread through our small town like wildfire. The Reed family, pillars of the community, at the center of a 50-year-old murder mystery. Robert, my beloved husband, revealed to be a killer. Nathan, my respected son, embroiled in a shocking cover-up. The scandal was immense, tearing through the polite veneer of our quiet lives. Gossip, whispers, questions, they followed me everywhere. My life, as I knew it, was irrevocably shattered. The arc of my character, forged not in quiet contemplation but in a crucible of devastating truth, had been completed. I, Evelyn Reed, who had always preferred the comfortable illusion, now stood firmly in the harsh light of reality. The soft, gentle woman had been replaced by someone stronger, someone who, at the end of her life, had finally chosen courage over complacency. I had lost the comfortable fiction of my past, but I had gained a profound sense of self, a quiet strength I never knew I possessed. Months passed. The house, now irrevocably marked by its grisly secret, was a constant reminder. The basement remained an open wound. I couldn't stay. With Sarah's help, I put the house up for sale. It sold quickly, a macabre tourist attraction for those fascinated by its dark history. I bought a smaller apartment, a bright, modern space with large windows overlooking a bustling park, a stark contrast to the secluded quiet of my old Victorian. There were no ghosts here, no hidden secrets lurking beneath the floorboards. Just fresh paint, new beginnings, and the promise of a different kind of quiet. One afternoon, unpacking a box of old mementos, I came across the Zippo lighter, now cleaned and gleaming, returned to me by Detective Adams. The initials DT shone brightly. I held it in my hand, feeling the weight of it, the weight of Daniel Thorne's rediscovered life, his finally acknowledged death. There was still a pang of grief for Robert, for the man I had loved and believed in, for the tragic path he had chosen. But it was overshadowed by a profound sense of peace. My new apartment was quiet, yes. But it was a different kind of quiet. Not the deceptive calm of a buried secret, but the genuine silence of a truth finally set free. It was a silence filled with echoes, not of hidden despair, but of lives finally unburdened. I understood now that being honest with myself, with the world, no matter how terrifying, was the only true freedom. My story was not one of a happy ending, but of an honest one. And sometimes, that was all the ending one could ask for. The last echo in the silence was not a whisper of a secret, but a resounding declaration of truth.